So let me say this. If you are an Adventist, you were taught some silly things. And I'm sure most of you former Adventists are going to agree with me. This one here is up near the top of the list of the silliness. You were taught John the Baptist ate carob pods, not locusts, as we read in Matthew 3:4 and Mark 1:6. Let me just say, was it unbiblical for the Jews to eat locust? We're going to answer that. Yet again, Adventists, and Ellen White in particular, are going to show their ignorance of the Bible, which Ellen White does all the time. That woman was really completely Bible ignorant. The nation of Israel was allowed to eat locusts. Let me just answer that question with an affirmative. Look here. Here's Leviticus 22. Of them you may eat the locust of any kind. So there it is. So I asked myself, why did Ellen White teach that John the Baptist didn't eat locusts, and she insisted on the fact that he ate a carob plant, a vegetable plant? Why was she so afraid of that? You know why? I know why. When you base your theology on an over 400-year-old translation, and here's my 1630 KJV, you're going to end up creating doctrinal error for yourself. And Adventists are great at doing that. Adventism loves the KJV. They did in the beginning. And the KJV has, well, errors in it, misstatements. It needs some updating. Nonetheless, this is my belief. This is what Ellen White did. She read the KJV and went, oh no, John the Baptist could not have ate locust. Why? Look with me here. Because it says in verse 4, and the same John had his remnant of camel's hair, and a leather girdle about his loins, and his meat was locusts and wild honey. His meat was locusts? So locusts are meat. Locusts are, well, not vegetable. So the KJV appears to call locust meat. By the way, let me just help you poor Adventists out. I looked up the word that you just saw translated as meat, and his meat was locust. The actual proper rendering of that word is food, not meat. His food was locust. So it's a much more general term as opposed to very specific like meat. No, his meat wasn't locust, but his food was locust. Ellen White couldn't even bother to do that. So anyway, right, because she's reading that. She's reading the King James here and goes, oh my gosh, his meat was locust. Wait, I got the health message. And I said in the health message that we shouldn't be eating so much meat. So John the Baptist is eating locusts, and locusts are meat, so we can't have that. That's a problem for Adventism. So what do you do if you're an Adventist? Well, you just simply change what the words mean. You just say, well, it really isn't locust or meat. It's a carob. It's a vegetable. So let's look at this Ellen White teaching that John the Baptist had a vegetarian diet that included locusts. And let's just look at it here, a youth instructor. I picked this magazine because they quote Ellen White articles. And on page 18, they did two things for us. You can see at the top in the red text, they're quoting the SDA commentary, and in the bottom in the purple text, they're actually quoting Ellen White. So in the top of the commentary, they're telling us it's a carob tree. In English, carob commonly known as locust. So they're setting us up here that locust really means carob. So that when you keep reading and you read Ellen White in the purple text, and it says John separated himself from friends and from the luxuries of life, his diet was purely vegetable, of locust. Well, they told us what a locust is above. A locust is really a carob plant. So it's vegetable, locust, and wild honey. Now, once Ellen White has made a pronouncement or a teaching on a topic, it is replicated over and over and over in Adventism and regarded as biblical truth. Let me just show you on the next slide, over 150 years, from 1868 to 2022, this teaching that, well, locust really doesn't always mean locust. It means carob pod. So look with me here in the upper left-hand corner. There's the 1868. The locust was a fruit. And they cite that Advent Review and Herald. And then the very quote to the right of it is the one from 2022, how the carob formed the diet of John the Baptist. And I got this page littered with other quotes, which just proves you Adventists were just taught the same silly thing. John the Baptist didn't eat locusts. It's really carobs. Now, Adventists not only appeal to Ellen White to prove that, well, it's not locust, it's carob. It's what the scholars say. Adventists are just intellectually weak and ineffective. To appeal to scholars, to say, well, I believe this because the scholars say so, it's something called an appeal to authority. Now, you get some scholar, well, I'm a scholar, and what I say, well, that's absolutely true. That is a bad reasoning method. In logic, like I said, it's called an appeal to authority. Let me say it another way. What Adventists are saying is, we believe this is true because scholars said it's true. Not because the argument can actually be proven to be true. No. We believe it's true as an Adventist because, well, scholars said it's true. That is a logical fallacy. That's poor reasoning, which I encounter in Adventism equals poor reasoning. Period. So let's just look here. Appeal to authority. Appeal to authority. It's a fallacious argument. The appeal to authority. You can see the underlying text in red. Appeal to authority is a logical fallacy that occurs when a claim is assumed to be true because it was made by a perceived authority figure. That's all Adventists are doing in this. So they appeal to Ellen White, and then they say, well, scholars said it was true. So appealing to authority to justify a belief in something is something I encounter all the time in Adventist literature. So let me just demonstrate to you how using an appeal to authority is faulty reasoning. I have right here, I got just 4. I could probably get, unfortunately, probably 14. These are from some very reputable commentary sets. Hermenia commentary set, the World Biblical Commentary set, the International Critical Commentary set, and a little easier one is the Torch Bible Series. These are all scholars in their field. And these are all commentaries on the book of Daniel. And you know what all these have in common? These scholars say, Daniel didn't write Daniel. It was either somebody else or a group of somebodies over time. But Daniel didn't write Daniel because these scholars say so. So an appeal to authority is in making that kind of argument. An Adventist can make the argument of, well, got all these scholars that said Daniel didn't write Daniel, so Daniel must not have written Daniel. Faulty reasoning, if anybody were to do that. So this just demonstrates the faulty reasoning of Adventism. So it's just wrong. So let's just read some of this faulty reasoning within Adventism. Look here. Signs of the Times, 1934. The Diet of John the Baptist. While the preponderance of evidence disclosed simply by the original Greek word akris seems to be rather in favor of animal locusts, nevertheless, scholarly opinion as to the absolute intent of the term, it's sharply divided. So there's their appeal to authority. Certain it is that those who hold to the vegetable locust interpretation are in a defensible position. Let's read the next one. From 1965, we got, again, the Diet of John the Baptist and locusts and honey. The English word locust indicates both an insect and a certain kind of tree. Bad answer, because the Bible wasn't written in English, Adventist. It was written in Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, and we should be answering that. But anyway, let's continue. So they start off bad. Then they go on to say this. Continue reading with me. The Greek word akris, from which locust is translated, seems always to refer to insects. And, well, we're gonna look at that, and they're pretty good. A fact which has led most commentators to conclude that John's diet consisted of a type of grasshopper dipped in honey. Then they go on to say, however, some scholars believe that the word akris means something other than an insect. John's locusts may have been carob pods. So here's the Adventist saying, well, the Greek word kind of always says this, but you've got these scholars over here that say that, and because, well, they say that, we're going to believe that. They don't give you why they believe that, any evidence for what they believe that. They just make the appeal to authority. Faulty logical reasoning, which is Adventism. But I found a 1970 ministry magazine that I believe is the real reason Adventists believe that John the Baptist ate carob pods and not locusts. And the real reason is simply because Ellen White said so. That's it. She is the final authority. Let's look here. Ministry, August of 1970. You see the red box. We're going to look at this paragraph right here. And it says this. The use of akris. Now see this word for locust, let me pause here. Locust, and you're going to see here in a minute, only appears 4 times in the Bible. 2 times in the Gospels, 2 times in the book of Revelation. So we have it used 4 times in just 2 different settings. One setting is talking about what John the Baptist is eating in his diet. The other setting is a future event and how these locusts are going to turn into scorpion-like beasts. So what this author here, let's go back to the article, is telling us is, well, the use of akris or locust in Revelation 9 obviously refers to locusts. There's Leviticus 11:22, which we've already seen, which God does not prohibit the eating of locusts. So let's continue reading. Linguistically, one would assume that akris, locusts, that formed a part of John the Baptist's diet referred to an insect. However, the evidence is not conclusive because there is contrary evidence in the writings of early church fathers. Most of the fathers held that John's diet was of plant origin. And then they say this, and here it is. The point is important because it determines whether we regard John the Baptist as a vegetarian or not. Remember how the King James translated it was the meat of locust. So the question is, well, is he a vegetarian or not? And who's going to settle that for us? Ellen White. Read the blue text with me. The Words and Testimony, Volume 3, page 62. His diet, purely vegetable, of locusts and wild honey. There it is. Ellen White's telling us it's vegetable, it's not meat. And her interpretation does what? Read these last few words. They commit us to the view that akris in Matthew and Mark refers to vegetable. That's it. This ministry magazine said the quiet part out loud. Ellen White said, this is not the meat of John the Baptist was not locust, it was carob. Because Ellen White said it, that's it. That settles it. It's just nice to find some other scholars who happen to say also that it was a carob. Now, I'm going to do something that lazy Adventists won't do. And we're going to look at the evidence. I'm going to define locust from the Greek and let the evidence lead me to my conclusion. Because here's what Adventists should be doing. We should be looking at the literature. Like, I remember when I first read this book, when I was doing some of my research on Daniel, and I read here that Daniel didn't write Daniel. My first reaction was I just literally wanted to throw this thing across the room. Then I realized I would be throwing lots of books across the room, all of these here, because, well, they all say the same thing. So I can read books by scholars, and I can use my Christian discernment and say, no, sorry, you're wrong, and here's why you're wrong. Not simply because you are wrong. So I have scholars that tell me in my library, Daniel wrote Daniel. I got scholars say Daniel didn't write Daniel. Oh no, so what do you do as a Christian? Well, you look at the preponderance of the evidence. And I did. So I'm going to show you some good scholars who I have looked at the evidence, and let's see what locust means. So here's the Blue Letter Bible, so we can just get an idea. There's so you can see, look at the Greek words, the Greek letters, akris, there it is. I mentioned this earlier, right? I went to a concordance, which lists every Greek word in the Bible. So here's the book that I used, and I went to here, I found the word akris, there it is. It only appears 4 times in the entire New Testament, twice in the Gospels, twice in the book of Revelation. Here are those 4 verses. Right here. Locust, locust, locust. So let's look at a reputable Greek English lexicon, which Adventists use, so I can use it too, right? And we're going to look at, on these 2 pages, 45, 46, where they define akris for us. So here it is. Akris. It's an insect. It's a grasshopper. It's a cicada. And then it tells us on the right-hand side, the 4 New Testament contexts in which akris occurs refers to, well, these insects, and they're edible, or as very destructive, and as in the 2 in Revelation. And then I like this next part here. Read with me here. Continue reading. Some persons have assumed that the reference to grasshoppers being eaten by John the Baptist should be understood as not as insects, but as caropods. But there is neither linguistic nor cultural evidence to support such an interpretation. Mic drop. Adventist, and a very Greek English lexicon that you guys use just ridiculed your position. And it told us why. There is no cultural evidence nor linguistic evidence. It's not that scholars said so. It's cultural and it's linguistic. And it doesn't exist. Let's look at another one here. Arndt Gingrich, Greek lexicon that was updated by a William Bauer. And you know what? This is Adventist approved too, because you Adventists use it all the time. So let's look here on this. Akris. It's a desert locust. A locust, a migratory phrase of, well, the grasshopper. Today, commonly eaten by the poorer people and used as food of John the Baptist. Oh, but continue reading with me here. Widespread notion that the locusts were carob pods. is supported neither by good linguistic evidence nor by probability. Adventists defeated once again. Let's go to Vines. This is an older Greek English lexicon, a little more has been somewhat updated, but it's still an older Greek English and even Hebrew lexicon. So locusts, their entry for that is what? They show us the two verses. There they are, Matthew 3:4, Mark 1:6, and what is it? It's the animals themselves, as forming part of the diet of John the Baptist. They're used as food. The Arabs stew them with butter after removing their heads and wings. And then it goes on to say this. In Revelation 9:3 and 7, they appear as monsters, representing satanic agencies let loose by divine judgments inflicted upon men for 5 months, which is, well, that's the time of the natural life of the locust. Here is that Revelation at least 9:3. Then the smoke came from locusts of the earth, and they were given the power of scorpions. So we got locusts, right? These flying creatures. Now we're going to have a tail of scorpions. But wait, what if they're Adventist carob pods? Oh no. There's the evil flying Adventist carob pod. So now we got the Seventh-day Adventist, I want to call it a miracle, of the flying scorpion-like carob pods. The Greek word for locust does not have two separate definitions. It has one. It is a grasshopper. None of the Greek English lexicons divide the word locust into two different meanings. Like, oh no, it means caropod when used in the Gospels, and it means locust when used in Revelation. See, there is no linguistic evidence for it. We don't have to appeal to some crazy scholars. No, we can just look at the evidence ourselves and make the decision and determination and review. We don't accept everything scholars say. If we did, we'd accept all this nonsense that I got right here on my right-hand side. These crazy scholars say Daniel didn't write Daniel. No, we're going to look at the evidence. We just did. And you know what? Locust means locust. That's it. If Adventists wanted to make a locust a caropod, then we're going to have the flying crazy carob pods in Revelation 9:3. Beware of the evil carob pods flying around. Ellen White, in this, and now here's the most egregious thing. She contradicts the very word of God. Ellen White forbids the eating of locusts. God allowed it. You saw it. In Leviticus 11:22, God said, you can't eat locusts. Ellen White said, no, you can't. It's caropods. Ellen White just placed herself above God. She said, I'm Ellen White. I know better. And I say you can't eat locusts. God said you could. See what I mean? Look at this woman. She is so subtle in her placing herself in position above God. She did so here in this example. God says you can eat them. Ellen White says you can't. Who are you going to trust? Good one, Seventh-day Adventists. So this video here demonstrates that Ellen White is completely unreliable and Adventism is completely not Christian. While the issue of whether John the Baptist ate caropods or locusts is not an issue of salvation whatsoever. But what is an issue is when you have someone who comes out and claims to be a messenger of God and then contradicts the very word of God, as Ellen White did here. Ellen White said you can't eat locusts. God says yes you can. And that's the issue here. Ellen White is not to be trusted. Adventism is not to be trusted. Adventism is not Christian. Adventists, get out of this false religion.